We're continuing through the large catechism today in our devotions, and we're looking at an explanation of the second commandment. For anyone who's unaware or who has their numbering mixed up, the second commandment is you are not to take the name of God in vain, or you shall not take the Lord's name in vain. It depends on what translation you're using, but I think there's a really helpful kind of understanding of what this means here. The large catechism reads, "It is a misuse of God's name if we call upon the Lord God in any way whatsoever to support falsehood or wrong of any kind." And then a little bit further down it says, "God's name cannot be abused more flagrantly than when it is used to lie and deceive." So this is on a very fundamental level. This means when we invoke the name of God, we ought to be very careful about how and why we do so. For example, if you ever have to testify in court and you put your hand on the Bible and you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. If you're a Christian and you're pursuing living, and you're trying to live your life faithful to the commandments, as we should, you have invoked God's name. You better tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth on the stand. And that's kind of that's one example that I think is maybe more public, even though I suspect a lot of us will never necessarily be in that position where we'll have to testify in court. But I mean, the same thing is in daily life. People use God's name, whether they're thinking about it or not, a lot. Saying, I swear to God. That's something that a lot of people will say. Either you're using his name carelessly and you're just throwing it around, which you shouldn't be doing, or you better take that really seriously because you are swearing in God's name, with God's name attached. So you best be taking whatever you're talking about seriously, and I think most times I hear that phrase, it's not in light of a very serious conversation. There's also the people kind of shorten that and say on God. The same way, you should be taking whatever you're saying very seriously, and if it's kind of you're just throwing it around carelessly, you should stop that. Because when we're not taking the name of God in vain, we should avoid falsehood, wrong of any kind, and we ought to be careful how we invoke it. Just throwing his name around, I don't think is appropriate. It's not in line with this commandment. It's not in line with the spirit of this commandment. And I guess the takeaway from this really should be we ought to carefully and seriously think about whenever we are speaking the Lord's name. And really, it should, I think the most appropriate, and maybe I don't want to say the only appropriate, but maybe the only appropriate way is when we're lifting something up in prayer, or we're glorifying God, or we're worshiping him, or we're talking about him in a reverent manner. I think any other use, at best, you're tiptoeing the line on this one. So that's what we have for the second commandment. If you have comments or questions or concerns, of course, you can put them down below. And with that, brothers and sisters, go in peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.